Sue Gray's report into lockdown parties in Downing Street is done. She wants it published in full. MPs from every party want to see it in full. The Prime Minister has said he will publish it in full, but now the police have got involved. And that means we may only see bits of that report this week. The most serious allegations will be stripped out. Will we ever know what really went on at those government parties in lockdown? For some, it doesn't matter. Move on, they say. There are much bigger issues going on in the world, like Russia or bills and taxes rising. For many others, though, among them crucially Tory MPs, getting to the truth does matter. And they are the ones who'll decide whether the Prime Minister stays or goes. This morning to talk about all that and the looming conflict in Ukraine, I'll be joined by the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, tipped to replace Boris Johnson if he doesn't survive. I'll be talking to the man leading the West's response to Russia's aggression, the Secretary-General of Nato, Jens Stoltenberg. Labour's Shadow Housing Secretary, Nandy, on what levelling up means to her. And we'll be joined in the latest of our New Year leader interviews by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey. Guiding us through the day's news, I'll be joined by the star of Sherlock, Doctor Who and so much else, actor and director Mark Gatiss, and the editor of the Sunday Times, Emma Tucker. Well, lots to find out over the next hour, which begins with the news from Catherine Downs.
Thank you very much, Sophie. A very good morning to you. Boris Johnson and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak have pledged to push ahead with a rise to national insurance in April. It comes despite growing Conservative backbench pressure to delay or abandon the tax rise. In a joint article in the Sunday Times, they say every penny raised will go towards boosting the NHS and social care. Britain is considering sending hundreds more troops to bolster the defences of NATO allies in Eastern Europe amid the build-up of Russian forces on Ukraine's border. Boris Johnson says he's ordered the armed forces to prepare to deploy across Europe in the coming days. A 9-year-old boy in Staffordshire and a 60-year-old woman in Aberdeen have died after being hit by falling trees during Storm Malik. Power lines have also been affected, with thousands of homes in Scotland and England without electricity. A second storm, Storm Corrie, is expected to bring further high winds to Scotland this afternoon. And will it be a history-making morning for Rafael Nadal, or can Daniil Medvedev upset another party as the pair meet in the Australian Open final? That is all from me for now. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock, but for now, back to you, Sophie.
Catherine, thank you. Now, let me show you what's on the front pages of this morning's paper. We'll start with the Mail on Sunday, and their headline goes, Red Wall Revolution to rescue Boris. It says that he's unveiling a radical blueprint to turbocharge the economy in deprived areas and help reset Boris Johnson's struggling premiership in the process. A rather different take on that from the Observer, though. They say it's a levelling up stunt to save Johnson's job, and they say that the new fund for poor areas, they say, is actually a recycled pledge. The Sunday Times headline, Sunak wins the tug-of-war over the Tory tax hike. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor agree that the national insurance rise must go ahead. In fact, they've written a piece that is in the Sunday Times today. We'll be talking about that with the editor of the Sunday Times in a moment. And also an extraordinary story on the front of the Sunday Times from Christina Lamb, a very, very experienced foreign reporter. In my 35 years as a reporter, I have never seen anything of this magnitude, she says. The Independent's front page, Storm Malik there, extraordinary photograph that of the roof that has been blown off this house, completely blown off the house as falling trees caused the deaths of a woman and a boy. It also talks about Rishi Sunak there putting finishing touches to his leadership bid. The Sunday Express, PM's defiant message to hostile Putin. The Sunday Telegraph, the PM's aide, this is Dan Rosenfield, watched cricket as Kabul fell, is their headline, and a photograph as well of the Prime Minister saying Britain ramps up firepower to deter Russian invasion. And finally, The Sun on Sunday, Forrest Gump. Their main story is that under pressure, Prince Andrew shouted at a female gardener over wrongly cut trees. Well, to join me now to look at the papers, Mark Gatiss, the actor, and from her home, the editor of the Sunday Times, Emma Tucker. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
A lot to talk about in the papers today. Emma, let's talk about, we'll start with you. There's a story that you have in the Sunday Times today, Saving Johnson's Bacon. This is written by your chief political commentator, Tim Shipman.
Yes, so that's Tim's sort of weekly take on what's really going on behind the scenes. And the theme, I think, that comes out from the read this week is that, somewhat miraculously, you could argue, Johnson seems more confident of his position now than he did at the start of the week. Probably, I mean, normally speaking, the announcement of a police inquiry into what was going on behind the scenes in government might worry a prime minister, but it seems to have worked in his favour in this instance, probably because of this insistence by the Met that they're only going to put out that when the report comes out, which we're now expecting it on Monday, it should have all the sort of important bits redacted.
There's some extraordinary details as well in his article about security, specifically concerns about highly sensitive, confidential information being left around the Prime Minister's flat.
Yeah, so this was this detail is about the fact that there's a flat at number 10 Downing Street where the Prime Minister lives with his family, and it has a keypad to allow people in and out. And what Tim's read reveals is that the code for this keypad was available to some of the Prime Minister's and his wife's friends, and there was a lot of coming and going. And at a certain point, civil servants went up to the flat and witnessed this material, some of it highly classified, sort of lying casually around, and thought, well, this is, and described it as a sort of frat boy culture, a frat house culture. And at this point said, right, that's it, no more red boxes upstairs. You're coming down. The boxes, if you're going to look at classified material, that has to be looked at in your office in Downing Street. You can't take it upstairs anymore.
Emma, can I just ask you as well, because there's a piece written by Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak that you've got in your paper today. What are we to make of the fact that they've done this joint article?
I think it's really significant. I think it's very significant they've come together. I think there was this sense that at the beginning of last week, the Prime Minister was wobbling over this national insurance planned increase for April. I think that Rishi Sunak has said, look, you know, we have to commit to this. We haven't got enough money to not do it. You can't allow yourself to be pushed around, or we can't allow ourselves to be pushed around by the backbenchers. You know, who's calling the shots here? Because you slightly got the feeling that any backbencher could walk in and say, this is what I want, and if you don't give it to me, I'm going to put in a letter. So I think this is a real commitment from the two most important people in government, the Prime Minister and his Chancellor. They've come together, they're saying enough's enough, we're pressing ahead with this, we have to do it. And for Rishi Sunak, it really matters as well, because his big game is he wants to be able to cut taxes before the next election. And he's worried that if they don't go ahead with this tax increase, they'll never be able to go ahead with it. And also, you know, like Boris Johnson has committed to sorting out the problem of social care. His predecessors failed. You know, is this going to be another Tory Prime Minister who fails to sort out social care? I mean, it's true that a lot of the money isn't initially going to go to social care, but it's a step towards it. So I think it's very significant, which is why, you know, we took the piece.
OK, let's talk, Mark, about another story that's in the Sunday Times as well. But this is the story by Christina Lamb about the situation she has uncovered or she's witnessing in Afghanistan. It's really harrowing to read, isn't it?
It's dreadful to read, and it does make you wonder, as I said before, whether what on earth it was all for. If the Taliban were able to retake Kabul without a shot fired, hundreds of thousands of people have died for absolutely nothing, and it's worse that we've just made things worse. I think constantly about the way that as war is grinding towards Ukraine, it's so easy for people to say these things, and then there's no aftercare, there's no thought of the consequences. It's just the most extraordinary story. This family having to sell their daughter.
It's this little girl here that we can see her in the papers here. She's 8 years old. Yeah. And her father has sold her for marriage to feed the family. And
is contemplating having to sell his 3-month-old daughter because they've got sort of 8 slices of bread between them
But for 30 people,
30
Christina
people,
says,
yeah.
8 slices of bread to feed 30 people, and the wife says she hasn't cooked a single potato for weeks now.
It's monstrous, but it's just almost impossible to grasp the vastness of this problem and then what the world can do about it.
Christina, let's move on to another story from you and Ukraine, of course. Boris to face down President Putin on Ukraine. Emma, sorry. Emma, I was talking Christina Lamb. Emma, I do apologise, sorry. Your correspondent. Emma, let's talk about Ukraine.
Yes, so this obviously is the other big, the big foreign story of the moment, and who knows where it's going to lead in the next couple of weeks. So the papers are reporting that a significant increase in we're sending more troops, we're sending more weaponry over to the border. I think the interesting question to ask here is what impact is all this going to have on Putin? We've got a very interesting piece inside the paper looking at the fact that in some ways, whether he goes to war or not is neither here nor there for the people that matter to Putin, because all of them, for them, war with Ukraine is like a spectator sport. These are the 500 richest people in Russia, most of whom have their money squirreled away and safely installed in London. And for them, it doesn't really make any odds. So Putin, obviously it's a massive gamble for him, but he can afford to do it in a way that perhaps we don't fully understand over here.
Mark, let's talk about another story in the papers, which is about Spotify that you've picked out here. This is in The Observer. Explain what's going on here. This is Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, who have taken themselves off Spotify.
Yes, they've announced they're taking their music off Spotify in protest at a podcast which appears to be promoting sort of anti-vax conspiracy theories. And it's just very interesting as a sort of new part of the culture war. A lot of people sort of saying, oh, who are these old fogies? Why should I care? And then an awful lot of people who really do care also up in arms. But what's very, very interesting is that both Joni Mitchell and Neil Young had polio as children. It struck me very strongly that there is a generational difference in people who are aware of the massive benefits of vaccines and the miracle that they were post-war, and then generationally people who've just grown up with them and taken them for granted, So it's another sort of great schism in our society against sort of pro and anti. But as I said, it's the world seems to be spiraling into madness. That we can somehow feel that doctors are the enemy and people who are trying to do you good are infringing your human rights. It's dizzying, some of it, really.
Let's talk as well about cyclists. I want to ask you both about this. So are you a cyclist?
Well, I'm an ex-cyclist. I run now. I stopped cycling because it was too frightening to cycle in London, and I was actually only last night seeing some Deliveroo drivers weaving through without any helmet, and it's just such a petrifying thing to do. But now the highway code is being changed, and it's just one of those. It is literally an accident waiting to happen. They've said that cyclists can now cycle down the middle of the road, but you can imagine a lot of people are going to get knocked off before they realise that the rules have changed.
Yes, Emma, this is the story in the Mail on Sunday, isn't it? They wouldn't let any cars pass for 8 miles, drivers fuming on the day that cyclists took over the road. This is a change to the highway code, but a lot of people don't realise it's happened.
No, they don't, which is somewhat worrying for cyclists. I think it's this idea that, built-up zones, everyone's going to have to share the roads, and this is about, I suppose, cyclists claiming the roads. If you extend 20 mile per hour zones everywhere, then everyone can share it. But I agree. I mean, it's people have been. I don't know how the highway code. How do people hear about it other than reading about it? It's not like we all get a memo through the door saying, "Oh, by the way, the highway code has changed." But I think it's. I don't know to what extent it will make a difference. Maybe all these low traffic zones that come in during lockdown will make our streets less, safer for cyclists. But it's going to be interesting to see what the fallout is. I think people forget that cyclists are also drivers. You're not either or, you're one or the other. So it may not be quite as confusing as everything.
Mark, let's just talk as well about something that you're appearing in very soon, next month, I think it is, at the Park Theatre. This is in London, but it's all about raising awareness of theatre, raising funds. Let's just show a clip of what it's all about.
A luxury cruise far from civilization, an impending storm, a stolen diamond, and a drink laced with poison. Join a different star sleuth each night as they attempt to solve this murder mystery without any rehearsal.
That's quite a cast list. The bit that terrifies me is without any rehearsal. Explain what's going on.
Well, this is a Park Theatre in Finsbury Park from March the 9th to February the 9th to March the 12th. It's the play itself obviously has been rehearsed with a full cast, and there's a guest inspector every night without any preparation whatsoever, and an earpiece in which our lines are fed. So we have to solve this murder sight unseen, and I imagine being pushed around the stage by the rest of the cast. So it's kind of terrifying and brilliant at the same time.
Do they just feed you your lines then? You have to speak them one after. You don't know what you're going to say.
This has been done once before. It's a fundraiser for Park, who a wonderful theatre, but like so many theatres during the and post-pandemic, are trying to get people back into the theatre and to raise awareness for the fact that they're not funded, you know. So it's a wonderful opportunity to get people back to what they most enjoy doing, which is having a great night out.
Well, very good luck with it. Mark Gatiss and Emma Tucker, thank you both for joining me this morning. Now, as you will have heard in the news, 2 people have been killed by falling trees during Storm Malik overnight. Another storm, Corrie, is about to sweep through Scotland. Let's get the latest from Sarah Keith-Lucas, who's in the Weather Centre for us. Sarah.
Hi, Sophie. Yes, well, we're in the calm between the storms at the moment. Of course, Storm Malik, as you were saying, yesterday swept across the northern half of the UK. So we're still seeing some disruption from that storm. Now, through today, things are turning wetter and windier from the northwest, and that is down to Storm Corrie approaching. Before it gets there, actually, many places seeing a lot of dry, settled weather. Lots of sunshine holding on for much of England and Wales through the day, but the rain moving in for Northern Ireland and Scotland, preceded by some snow over the high ground as well. And temperatures about 5 to 9 degrees, but it is going to be the strength of the wind that's going to cause some problems, particularly later on this evening and overnight as that storm system sweeps across the northern half of the UK. So we've got a yellow warning from the Met Office for gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour for much of the north of the UK, but 80, possibly 90 miles per hour for the north of Scotland, where there is an amber weather warning in force. So here's Storm Corrie. It sweeps its way across all areas as we move through tonight. Those winds always strongest further north, not quite as windy towards the south. It's going to be a fairly chilly night, not as cold as the night we've just seen. Strong winds initially on Monday, but they will slowly ease through the day. But if you want to catch up with any of the weather warnings in force for Storm Corrie, you can always find them on our website. Sophie.
Sarah, thank you. Now, alarm continues to grow over what is happening on the Russian border with Ukraine. Around 100,000 of Vladimir Putin's troops, equipped with everything from tanks and artillery to ammunition and air power, are currently stationed along Ukraine's vast border. The increasing military presence is made up of some new units which have travelled almost 4,000 miles from the far east of Russia, many of them recently taking up positions in neighbouring Belarus. One of the best ways of tracking what is happening is through satellite images, and you can see here aerial tanks, artillery and support equipment in Yelnya, a Russian town north of Ukraine, and this further south in Klimovo, closer to Ukraine's border, shows military vehicles. President Putin has repeatedly denied that he is planning an invasion, but the US is warning Russia could cross that border within weeks. The West's response is being coordinated by Nato, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was an alliance of just 12 countries created in 1949 in the aftermath of World War II to provide protection against an attack from Germany and the Soviet Union. Since then, it has expanded a lot. It now has 30 members, including former Soviet states. Well, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg joins me now live from Brussels. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. Do you think that a Russian invasion of Ukraine is imminent?
What we see is a very significant Russian military build-up with more troops, more heavy equipment, as you just described, but also very threatening rhetoric. And then we have the track record of Russia using force against Ukraine before. But there is no certainty about the intentions. And of course, what NATO allies do is that we send a clear message to Russia that they should not use force against Ukraine once again, and we are also pursuing a diplomatic track to prevent them from doing so, because it is in no one's interest to have a new armed conflict in Europe.
But President Biden says there's a distinct possibility that the Russians could invade in February. Do you agree with him on that?
There is a real risk, and that's exactly why NATO allies have stepped up with more support to Ukraine. Ukraine has the right to self-defense, and we are helping them with upholding that right. While we are sending a very clear message to Russia that if they use force again, there will be a high price for them to pay with economic and political sanctions, and why NATO allies are stepping up our support to NATO allies in the eastern part of the alliance, the Baltic region and the Black Sea region.
How much are you prepared? How far are you prepared to go to protect Ukraine?
We have to distinguish between NATO allies and Ukraine. Ukraine is a partner. We provide support. We help them with modernizing the defense and security institutions. NATO allies as the United Kingdom, United States, Canada are providing trainers. Thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have been trained over the last years. So the Ukrainian armed forces is much stronger, much larger, much better equipped and much better trained now than back in 2014 when Russia invaded the first time. So we provide support to Ukraine. But for NATO allies, like for instance the countries bordering Ukraine, Romania, the Baltic countries and so on, for them and for all other NATO allies, we provide 100% security guarantees, meaning that if one ally is attacked, that will trigger a response from the whole alliance, one for all for one, which is the core message of NATO. So for NATO allies, it's a 100% security guarantee, and that is reinforced by the presence of NATO troops in the eastern part of the alliance. UK leads one of these battle groups we have deployed to the Baltic region. For Ukraine, a partner, we provide support and also send a message that there will be heavy economic sanctions if Russia uses force again.
So you provide support and you can threaten sanctions, but as we know, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Would you rule out putting NATO troops in Ukraine in the eventuality that Russia did invade?
We have no plans to deploy NATO combat troops to Ukraine. NATO allies have trainers there. We help them from NATO with building capacity, modernizing their defenses, including their cyber defenses. NATO allies also provide equipment, defensive weapons, like the UK has now provided, for instance, anti-tank weapons. So we do a lot of stuff to help Ukraine strengthen its capability to defend itself. But again, Ukraine is not a NATO ally, so the 100% security guarantees that an attack on one ally will trigger a response from the whole alliance, that applies for NATO allies, not for a close and highly valued partner.
But just to be very clear, you say you have no plans. Would you absolutely rule that out? Will we not see a scenario in which NATO troops go into Ukraine and are fighting Russian troops? That will not happen.
No, we are focusing on providing support to Ukraine, help them to uphold their right for self-defense, and also sending a message to Russia that we will impose severe sanctions on Russia if they once again use force against Ukraine. And then, of course, we have already increased our presence in the eastern part of the NATO alliance on NATO territory, and we are ready to do even more of that if needed. The paradox is that Putin, or President Putin and Russia, they went into Ukraine in 2014 because they didn't like to have NATO close to their borders. The more aggressive they are, the more NATO they will get at the borders, with increased presence in the eastern part of the NATO alliance.
But President Putin...
we want to avoid all of this, and that's the reason why that's the reason why we are pursuing a diplomatic path, and why I invited also Russia to sit down and to continue to meet with NATO to discuss a wide range of issues to de-escalate and find a political solution.
So President Putin will know then that if he did invade Ukraine, NATO troops would not be going in to support the Ukrainian soldiers. NATO troops would not take action against Russian soldiers. So it is only sanctions that can have some effect. The president of Ukraine himself says that sanctions will have no effect on Vladimir Putin.
Well, severe sanctions have an effect. It means that Russia has to pay a high price. And second, it has an effect that NATO allies provide strong support to the Ukrainian defense forces, armed forces. They are much bigger, much stronger, much better trained and equipped and command now than in 2014, not least because of support from NATO and NATO allies. But yes, there is a difference between being a NATO member and being a strong and highly valued partner as Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. But again, I think it is extremely important to try to prevent the situation where we have armed conflict in Europe once again. And that's the reason why we have put forward written proposals to Russia on issues like arms control, missiles, nuclear, more transparency on military activities, mechanisms to reduce risks for misunderstandings, military lines of communications, a wide range of issues where we are ready to sit down with Russia to engage in real diplomatic efforts to find a political solution to prevent a new armed conflict in Europe.
The Chief of the Defence Staff, the UK's Chief of Defence Staff, said that the significance of the worst scenarios in terms of a full invasion of Ukraine would be on a scale not seen in Europe since World War II. Do you agree with that? Is it as serious as that?
It is very serious because we have seen this very strong military build-up by Russia, and therefore it is important to send a clear message that they should not use those capabilities to launch a new full-fledged or new armed attack against Ukraine. And therefore I think it's also important that we send this strong message of unity, of deterrence, but also of our diplomatic efforts. And therefore I welcome the announcement by the British government to both step up the support to NATO with more troops, with more warships, with more jets to NATO presence in the east, but also the diplomatic initiative by the United Kingdom. This demonstrates UK leadership, and this is a leadership we need, especially now when we are faced with this very critical and pivotal time for European security.
If there were a Russian invasion, and you're saying that sanctions are far more likely than any troops, NATO troops on the ground, are you preparing for the possibility that Russia could retaliate against sanctions by cutting off gas supplies to Europe?
We are concerned about the energy situation in Europe because it demonstrates the vulnerability of being too dependent on one supplier of natural gas. And that's the reason why NATO allies agree that we need to work and focus on diversification of supplies. And we also took very carefully note of what the International Energy Agency said recently, that Russia has manipulated the European gas market by holding back supplies, by depleting the storage facilities of natural gas. And this just highlights the importance of developing alternative sources for energy supplies to Europe, because what we face now is serious with very high prices for many European customers.
Absolutely, and Europe is very dependent on Russian supplies. Europe gets a third of its supplies from Russia. You say you're worried about it, but are you actually doing anything actively to prepare for it? Because this could happen quite quickly.
NATO allies are addressing that issue by working on alternative sources of supply, both in the short run, like LNG, also liquid natural gas, which can be transported by ships. I know that the United States are talking closely to European allies, to the European Union, from other sources, from the United States, from Qatar, and from other sources. So that's to boost up, to increase deliveries, supplies from existing sources. Then in the more longer term, this is about reducing the dependence on these types of energy sources to develop new and also more environmentally friendly domestic energy sources, but that will take some more time. It will require severe or strong, big investments by European allies to change the energy structure of our countries.
The President of Ukraine says that Western leaders are overreacting about the threat from Russia and creating panic. Why is he saying that?
Well, I have spoken recently with President Zelensky. I also spoke very recently with Prime Minister Johnson and President Biden last week. And I think we really all agree that there is a real danger, but at the same time that we need to pursue this balanced approach, meaning a message of our readiness to provide support to Ukraine as we do, our readiness to impose sanctions, but at the same time continue to work for a political solution. And that is also the message from President Zelensky, that he wants us to send a message to Russia that there will be severe consequences. But of course, the most important thing is to try to prevent military action by Russia against Ukraine. And so meaning we need to work hard for the best, but be prepared for the worst. And that's exactly what we do, also in close coordination with President Zelensky and Ukraine. They are in constant dialogue, contact with us at different levels, including me speaking to President Zelensky several times.
Boris Johnson is going to be talking, we are told, to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. What do you want him to say?
First of all, I think it's a good thing that Prime Minister Johnson speaks to President Putin. It demonstrates that we also reach out for a diplomatic path, for a diplomatic solution, and that's absolutely in line with what NATO allies and NATO is doing. And we have coordinated our efforts over a long period of time, including by direct talks between NATO leaders, and I spoke with Prime Minister Johnson recently on the importance of also reaching out diplomatically to Russia. I think the important message is that we are ready to sit down. We have a wide range of issues. We have actually conveyed written concrete proposals to Russia on arms control, on nuclear missiles and other things. But if Russia decides to use force, then there will be a high price for them to pay. So it is up to Russia to decide whether they choose the path of diplomacy or whether they once again decides to use force and decides to choose the path of confrontation.
Jens Stoltenberg, thank you very much for joining us from Brussels this morning. Now, back to matters closer to home. The long-awaited Sue Gray report and those parties. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, tweeted this on Friday. A stitch-up between the Met leadership and Number 10 will damage our politics for generations, and it looks like it is happening right in front of our eyes. Well, Sir Ed Davey joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
A stitch-up. What evidence do you actually have of a stitch-up between the Metropolitan Police and Downing Street?
Well, I have huge respect for police officers, rank-and-file police officers who put their lives on the line to keep us safe. And for them to do their job, the public have to have trust and confidence in them. But the way the Met has handled this, I think, is undermining that. And there is this perception. Just look at what's happened. First of all, the Met said they wouldn't investigate at all because it was retrospective offences. Then they said they might, but they want to let Sue Gray get on with her report. Then they said they would investigate and Sue Gray's report could be published in full. Then they changed their minds for a fourth time and said Sue Gray's report had to wait till they'd done their investigation. This is chaos, absolute chaos. And it may be a cock-up, but equally it could be something worse.
You called it a stitch-up at both points, though, when they weren't investigating and now that they are.
Well, I wanted to investigate. I wrote to the Met Commissioner, Cressida Dick, several weeks ago to urge her to investigate. And if she'd done that then, probably their report would have been published and we wouldn't be in the mess we are now with this complete paralysis in government. So I've always wanted the Met to investigate. But what I didn't want, I don't think anybody wanted, was them to make such a hash of this, changing their position so many times, which of course makes people concerned.
But the police commander who's leading this investigation, who's called Catherine Roper, says she's going to do so without fear or favour. Do you not believe that? Are you saying that the police are corrupt, that they're trying to save the Prime Minister?
No, not at all. We all expect the police to do their job properly, and I really hope that is what happens. What is Number 10 doing this? We have a Prime Minister who's clearly broken the rules. I think we've all seen that. We have a Prime Minister who's then lied about that to Parliament and misled it. No one trusts this Prime Minister. It's why I've called very strongly that he should resign. I was at a school in my constituency the other week, and the young people were saying, the Prime Minister should resign. And I think he's put the police in a difficult position.
I'm just confused why you have used these words stitch-up, because you don't really know for sure. You have no evidence that it is a stitch-up.
I said it was a perception. I was really clear about that.
And the perception is there because you keep saying it.
No, the perception is there because the Mets completely mishandled this, changing their times 4 or even 5 times. And it's not just me who's saying this, it's lawyers, it's the former Director of Public Prosecutions. A number of people share my view that they've handled it so bad. Now, it might be incompetence. It might be just cock-up, maybe just completely got it wrong, in which case that's bad enough. I hope it isn't something more serious.
It's obviously very important that we get to the truth. So, bottom line, do you trust the police to do this?
We all have to trust the police to do this.
Do you trust the police to do this?
I do trust the police, but what I want to make sure is they explain themselves fully. What I'd really like to see is this. I'd like to see Sue Gray's inquiry published in full on Monday, and then we can look at that. If the police think there should be redactions, they should say so. They should come out and explain themselves. And that's been the problem. Their communications has been shocking, and that's why this perception has arisen.
Let's talk about something else that is very, very important for a lot of people and is coming up, the spiralling cost of living, energy bills. Is it fair that the poorest families in this country pay the green levies on their energy bills? Are you a former energy secretary?
Well, it's not the green levies that are causing the energy bill problem, of course.
No, but it's a lot of money, isn't it?
Well, it's the rising gas prices that are causing the problem. I'm proud of my record, Secretary of State for Energy, because we invested in renewables and in energy insulation. That actually has reduced bills. But the government failed, the Conservatives failed after 2015 to continue my policies, Liberal Democrat policies, of investing in renewables and investing in insulation. And if they'd done what we'd done, energy bills would be £2.5 billion lower. So I think the government has to act, but it has to deal with a real problem.
But energy bills have baked into them these green levies, which is 12.5 pence out of every pound. That's what we pay for the green levies. You got them baked in. They were baked into our energy bills. You fought like a tiger, were your words back in, about 6-7 years ago. You fought like a tiger to keep those in the bills. Is that fair for people, or should they not be moved to general taxation?
But Sophie, let me make it clear. The rising heating bills, which I'm deeply worried about, which the government should do something about, is because of gas prices.
Oh, absolutely.
And the problem with the Prime Minister is because he's lied and broken the rules and is completely focused on saving his own skin, he's not taking the action. When people are faced with these bills, and what Liberal Democrats are calling for is a cost of living summit in 10 Downing Street. Let's have a work event, not more parties. And at that cost of living summit, he should have the chief executives of the energy companies, the water companies, the telecoms companies, and get them to take action. Liberal Democrats have put forward our proposals. These are really strong proposals. We think there should be what we call a Robin Hood tax, a windfall tax on the profits of these gas companies, and that money should be used to reduce people's bills.
That's a one-off windfall tax, isn't it? Which could potentially raise a lot of money in a one-off tax, but that is one-off, and this is something that is going to go on for a lot longer than a year.
Well, I do actually think that if these gas prices continue, that windfall tax would have to continue so we could protect the poorest, whether it's through increasing the warm home discounts, which I'm very strongly supportive, taking 7.5 million people, their energy bills lower. I would want to increase that to include people on universal credit. We'd want to take action with this Robin Hood tax to help other people too. Pensioners, we've argued that the winter fuel allowance should be doubled, paid for by this windfall tax on the gas companies.
These gas companies that you're going to be taking a lot of money off are actually the same companies, same energy companies that are investing an awful lot of money in renewable energy.
Well, nowhere near enough. And let's remember, these are totally unexpected profits. The idea they're affecting their investment is for the birds. We have an energy crisis. The government is doing nothing. There should be a cost of living summit in 10 Downing Street, and they should look at the proposals that Liberal Democrats have come forward. Our proposals would save the typical struggling family nearly £1,000 a year. That's the sort of package that the government should be putting forward, and the fact that it isn't is mainly because Boris Johnson's too busy saving his own skin.
Sir Davey, thank you. Now, Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Housing and Levelling Up Secretary, joins me from Salford. Good morning.
Morning.
Let's talk about the Sue Gray report first of all. Will publishing that report in full jeopardise the investigation?
Well, look, the reason that we've got to have the Sue Gray report is because the Prime Minister won't come clean on what has been going on in Downing Street and his involvement in it. We could sort all of this out without him having to hide behind a civil servant or the Met Police. He could just come clean. But since he won't come clean, we believe that the most important thing is to get that report out in full. There are a lot of bereaved families, there are a lot of people who made huge sacrifices, who deserve to hear the truth from the Prime Minister. And if he won't put an end to this circus and this stasis in government when people are dealing with huge issues around the country, cost of living crisis, levelling up plans stalled, if he won't do it, then that report has to come out in full so that people can judge for themselves.
Is the problem for you, for Labour, that every day that we don't see the full report makes the Prime Minister more likely to survive? The danger for the Labour Party that the public somehow moves on just as you keep calling for him to resign?
Well, look, the Prime Minister, it's up to the Prime Minister what he does now, and it's up to Tory MPs. In the end, he's going to have to face the public and he's going to have to answer to the public for what he's done. But we believe that it's absolutely essential that he levels with people, that he comes clean. You shouldn't need a police investigation to tell you whether you're at a party or not. And it matters to a lot of people that people follow the rules that they make. And that's why we say publish this report in full, put an end to this circus, and then get on with doing your job.
When you look at the polls over the recent weeks, Labour had a big lead. Now we're told it's halved. It's a 5.
Yeah, I mean, polls go up and down. I've been around in politics long enough to have seen it from every which way. But my eye is on the country. What I'm really concerned about at the moment is that people are really struggling to keep their heads above water. Everywhere I've been in the last couple of weeks, across the Yorkshire and the Humber, across the northwest of England, people are saying energy bills are going up, shopping costs more, and they're about to face a tax hike, which we've just had confirmed this morning from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor in a couple of months' time. People just simply can't do it. And meanwhile, we've got this farcical situation of a Prime Minister hiding from the public and refusing to come clean, being investigated by the Met Police. And we've got a levelling up secretary who's spending his time ringing around Tory MPs trying to shore up support for the Prime Minister instead of actually putting in place proper plans to give all of our parts of the country the good jobs, the opportunities that they deserve. It's just not good enough. Let's
talk about levelling up. We're no doubt going to hear a lot more about that this week. Levelling up, the phrase, didn't even exist until the Conservatives came up with it. You are now levelling up secretary. What do you actually think that means?
I think it means getting good jobs back into our communities and the wages that sustain our high streets and allow town centres to thrive so that young people don't have to get out to get on. That's been the reality for far too many people in far too many parts of the country. We've just been written off by national government for too long. And the plans that we had this morning, the release that we had from the government, this recycled money, which gives us a bit of a refund in a few places on the money that we've lost, just completely misses the point. People need money back in their pockets. We need good jobs and wages. There are parts of the country where that is being realised. Investment in renewables, which cuts energy bills, the energy bills you were just discussing. It gets money back into people's pockets. It creates apprenticeships. And most of all, it gives places that within living memory once powered this country the chance to make a contribution. And again, we demand and we deserve that level of investment from our government. We've got ambition for our people and our places, but why hasn't the government?
What about national insurance, this national insurance rise? Would scrapping that help with levelling up?
Well, you can't possibly hit people with more taxes at the moment. It's just simply not possible for a lot of people to survive. The stories that I'm hearing from people across the country about the sacrifices they're going to have to make are enormous. But what's worse is that the government doesn't seem to have understood that if you want what they're billing as King's Cross style regeneration, you have to have central London style wages. You have to have
If you were in government, would you repeal this national insurance rise? Would you not do it?
Well, we're hoping that the government won't go ahead with it.
Would you, though, not do it?
Well, look, we wouldn't bring it in the first place. I mean, let me be absolutely clear with you. If there was a Labour government today, there would be no rise in national insurance. People would not be facing the prospect of seeing their incomes squeezed even more. Why? Because we've got to get people spending again. We've got to get people spending on their high streets in order to sustain them. We've got to allow families the security that they need to do well.
So if the government, the government is set on
the same day that they've said that they want to level up the country, they're also reaffirming this tax hike for people. The two things go hand in hand.
Let's say you win the next election. Do you then repeal it? Do you then cancel this national insurance rise?
Well, look, I mean, with a bit of luck, this won't come in at all. We're going to be doing everything that we can over the next few weeks to try and appeal to Tory MPs' consciences and try and persuade the Prime Minister to rethink. But if we can't do that, what we'll do is come forward with a much fairer taxation system that doesn't hit working people the hardest. The people who can least afford to bear it bear the greatest brunt of our tax system. That isn't just true in relation to national insurance contributions, that's also true in relation to business rates, for example, something that have got to be dealt with if we're going to get our high streets thriving again. We'll put forward fairer taxation plans in the round to make sure that the people who can most bear the burden bear the biggest burden.
Just sticking on national insurance, if you come in as the next government, would you repeal the national insurance rise, yes or no?
Well, look, I'm trying to explain to you, Sophie, that we wouldn't bring this in the first place. And if the government ploughs ahead with it, and we get into government, what we will do is reform the taxation system in the round to make sure that people aren't paying more when they've got less. That is the problem. That is the reason why a lot of families are struggling to keep their heads above water, not because they're being hit by one thing, but because they're being hit by thing after thing after thing. It's shopping bills going up, it's energy bills, it's VAT, it's national insurance. All of these things are squeezing working people and destroying any prospect of levelling up across our communities. And we deserve better.
Lisa, Nandy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, is travelling this week to Ukraine. Before that, she is joining me here this morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming on to talk to us. Are you working on the assumption that President Putin is going to invade Ukraine?
We think it's highly likely that he is looking to invade Ukraine. That is why we're doing all we can through deterrence and diplomacy to urge him to desist. That's why we are strengthening our sanctions regime here in the United Kingdom. We're going to be introducing new legislation so that we can hit targets, including those who are key to the Kremlin's continuation and the continuation of the Russian regime. We're also supplying and offering extra support into our Baltic allies across the Black Sea, as well as supplying the Ukrainians with defensive weapons. And the United Kingdom is the largest contributor to NATO in Europe, and we are the largest European NATO supporter of troops and defences in Europe.
I want to talk to you about sanctions in a moment, but just in terms of what could happen, are you thinking an invasion is imminent?
Well, what we are seeing is attempts by the Russian regime to destabilise Ukrainian democracy. Last week we revealed intelligence that showed an attempt by the Kremlin to install a puppet regime in Kiev. We've seen cyber attacks. We've seen other attempts to destabilise Ukraine. At the same time, we've seen this big build-up on the border. You know, there is a real threat of invasion, but we don't know what's going to happen. No one can predict the future. What we have to do is work as hard as we can to stop that happening, because it would be terrible for Europe. It would be terrible for freedom and democracy. And I think it would be very bad for the Russian government themselves, because it could well end up as a quagmire, as we saw in Chechnya, as we saw in Afghanistan. The Ukrainians will fight. That is absolutely clear. So we are doing all we can to prevent that happening.
The Ukrainians will fight. Jens Stoltenberg just told us, the Secretary General of NATO, said that there is no scenario in which NATO soldiers are fighting alongside Ukrainian soldiers. Could we see British soldiers on the ground? Is that something that you rule out, or is it a possibility?
That's very unlikely.
But it's not something you rule out.
we don't, it's very unlikely, and the Defence Secretary has been clear about that. But what we are doing is we're training up Ukrainian soldiers. So we've trained up 20,000 troops in Ukraine. We've supplied anti-tank missiles, defensive weapons. We're giving support to the Ukrainian Navy. We're giving support to the Ukrainian energy sector to help them become more energy independent. So we really are giving every possible support we can to Ukraine. And we are one of the leading donors of lethal aid to Ukraine to make sure that they are in the best possible position to defend themselves against Russia. But Ukraine is very different from the status of the Baltic countries like Estonia, who are members of Nato, and we have a security guarantee with. And that's why we're doubling, we're offering to double the number of troops into Estonia, where we have the enhanced forward presence, to make sure that we are bolstering support for those crucial NATO allies who are very close to Russia.
But what people want to know is there any scenario in which British soldiers are fighting with Ukrainians they've been training, is there any scenario in which they're fighting with Ukrainians against the Russian soldiers?
That is very unlikely. This is about making sure that the Ukrainian forces have all the support we can give them, whether it's intelligence support, whether it's cyber support, whether it's defensive weapons, which we have been supplying into Ukraine.
What about sanctions? Because you've spoken about those already, and the president of Ukraine says sanctions against President Putin, against Russia, will not work.
Sanctions can be effective. What they have to be is they have to be coordinated. So we've done a lot of work as the UK to pull together our G7 allies to make it clear to Vladimir Putin there would be severe costs on an invasion into Ukraine. And we would target Russian financial institutions, we would target energy companies, we will target oligarchs close to the Kremlin. And that's why the UK is broadening our sanctions regime to make sure that those people have nowhere to hide, and that we could potentially target any interest that has an impact on the Russian government.
But the problem is that a lot of people are saying that they are hiding, and they're hiding in the UK, they're hiding in London.
Well, we've already taken action. We put in place the Magnitsky sanctions, and what I'm saying is this week we will be doing more to make sure we can target all interests of direct relevance to the Russian government. But we need to work with our allies on this. The fact is that Europe has been too dependent on Russian gas. It's very good to hear the Germans saying that Nord Stream 2 is unlikely to go ahead in the event of a Russian invasion. But that is the type of measure we need, reducing the dependence of Europe on Russian gas, making sure there are alternatives, making sure that we have alternatives domestically, so we can really go after these Russian interests that are bankrolling the regime.
But the sanctions need to have bite, and even our own Intelligence and Security Committee says Russians with links to Putin are so well integrated into the UK business and social scene that it's almost impossible to untangle. That's why it's proving so difficult to tackle.
Well, this is why we're doing more. This is why we are broadening our sanctions regime. This is why we are saying
what are you doing?
That we will take action. Well, we're going to be introducing legislation to make sure that sanctions don't just target companies who are actively destabilising democracies in Ukraine, but are also of strategic importance to the Kremlin.
But what are you
so
doing
this
to
is about
target the money
targeting
here,
the oligarchs.
What about the money here in the UK?
Well, we've already seized over £1 billion of illicit finance in the UK. We have improved our illicit finance regime, and we continue to look at what more can be done.
There's a Centre for American Progress. There's a think tank with links to the President Biden, who says uprooting Kremlin-linked oligarchs will be a challenge given the close ties between Russian money and the United Kingdom's ruling Conservative Party, the press and its real estate and financial industry. They clearly think not enough is being done.
We are doing more. We are introducing new legislation to widen our ability to take sanctions forward. We have legislated on illicit finance, and we continue to pursue that. And I think it's very important. You know, there's a real threat here to freedom and democracy in Europe, and that is more important than short-term economic gain, both for the United Kingdom, but also for our European allies. This is why it's so important that we diversify away from dependence on Russian gas. But it's not sanctions alone that will deter Vladimir Putin. it is also about Ukraine's defensive capability, making sure they've got those defensive weapons, those anti-tank weapons, making sure we're clear with Vladimir Putin that this is not going to be easy. The Ukrainians will fight. This could well result in a quagmire similar to Afghanistan, similar to Chechnya. That's what we have to be clear about. And this is why I'm travelling to Ukraine. I'm also going to be travelling to Moscow in the next fortnight. The Prime Minister will be travelling to Eastern Europe. We need to get that message across to the Russian government that this is not something that is going to be simple or easy. This will result in a quagmire.
How do you protect against Russia retaliating, cutting off gas supplies to Europe? We're not that dependent on Russian gas supplies, but it would have a huge impact on us anyway.
Well, we are talking to our allies about this. The United States has more it can do on liquid natural gas. We're looking about the Middle East and what other supplies we can secure from the Middle East. And in the long term, we need more nuclear energy, we need more renewable energy, so we're less dependent on Russian gas as a European continent.
Do you accept that the national insurance rise is unpopular among Tory voters?
We are in a very difficult situation. We have spent a lot of money on the COVID crisis, which had public support, whether that was the furlough scheme, whether it's the business support scheme. And the reality is we do need to pay that money back. What is crucial, though, is this government has really led in the vaccine scheme, the booster rollout. So we're seeing ourselves recover the economy quicker. We're seeing economic growth at the highest level.
Do you accept, though, that it is an unpopular tax among Tory voters?
Taxes are never popular, Sophie. They're never popular. And as soon as possible, we want to be in a position to lower our tax rates. We want to drive economic growth because ultimately that is what will make our country successful. But we do face a short-term issue, which is that we have spent significant amounts of money dealing with the COVID crisis that does need to be paid back.
Do you accept that it is an unfair tax, that working families are going to be shouldering the burden of this? Somebody who is on £30,000 a year, for example, £250 more every year, £50,000, £500 more every year.
This tax has been designed to deliver the improvements that are needed to the National Health Service and to social care.
But it could have been spread out more fairly, couldn't it?
All of us, including the Chancellor, including the Prime Minister, want to be able to lower taxes. We want to see the economy grow. We want to take full advantage of our post-Brexit freedoms to do things like improve regulation areas like financial services so we can grow the economy. And the Prime Minister has been very forward-leaning on COVID, taking decisions other governments didn't take, opening up the economy early, and we are seeing the positive results. So we're seeing employment higher now than it was before the pandemic started, and that is ultimately the way that we are going to pay for this.
It's a question of fairness, isn't it? And even the Institute for Fiscal Studies says it's disappointing that the government did not find a better package of tax measures to fund these spending increases. A simple increase in income tax would have been preferable because, as it is, the national insurance is just going to be paid for by working people. Pensioners who have money will not be doing it.
Well, there are various arguments for various different sorts of taxes, and as I've said, no tax is popular. This is why it's vital that we get the economy growing, we take advantage of those post-Brexit freedoms. But what the Chancellor has to do when he looks at the budget is he has to look at all of the tax options in the round and come to the best decision.
When are we going to see the Sue Gray report?
Well, that's a matter for Sue Gray. She has to get to the point. When do you think we're going to see it? Well, your guess is as good as mine on that front, Sophie. I do not know the answer to that. But what I know,
will we see it all? Will we see the full unredacted report?
It is our intention to publish the full report.
Intention means you absolutely will. Can you guarantee you will publish it?
Well, I haven't seen the report, Sophie, but it is absolutely our intention to publish the full report.
It is a bit of a mess, all of this, isn't it?
Well, there are issues, of course, with the fact that we now have the police investigation alongside the Sue Gray report, but we have an independent report being conducted by Sue Gray. We have an operationally independent police force, and we have to allow them to get on with that. My view, Sophie, is the Prime Minister has apologised for what happened. He made it clear that mistakes were made. And we have so many other issues that are of major importance to this country to focus on. You've been talking about the recovery from COVID. I've been talking about the threat we face from Russia on the Ukrainian border, threatening democracy and freedom in Europe. So yes, we want to see the results of those reports, but my focus as Foreign Secretary is on these very, very serious threats that we are facing.
Is Boris Johnson the best leader to take the Conservatives into the next general election?
Absolutely, he is.
You're not tempted?
There is no contest. There is no discussion. He has achieved an 80-seat majority for the Conservative Party. He has delivered on the COVID vaccine programme, the booster programme. He's delivered on Brexit, and he will do a fantastic job winning the next election for the Conservative Party.
If he is found to have broken the COVID rules or the COVID laws that he wrote, that he told the nation to follow, should he resign?
I'm not going to answer hypothetical questions.
It's not hypothetical.
He has already apologised for what had happened and the mistakes that have been made. And I was, there in the House of Commons. I saw that happen. I think now, of course, we need to get the results of these reports, but we do need to focus on the very important issues.
And that's what the public. Though. The future of the Prime Minister is very important as well. If he's lied to Parliament, should he resign? We know what the ministerial code is. Should he resign if he's lied to Parliament?
I'm not going to answer hypothetical questions. The future of the Prime Minister is assured. He's doing an excellent job on the things that matter, recovering the economy from COVID, getting Brexit done, getting this country going again.
Liz Truss, thank you very much. And thank you very much for watching. We will be back next week. Enjoy your Sunday. Goodbye.